Hello, once again, wonderful people of YouTube land. This is again your good pal, Wild Elf 26. It was a little windy, gusty a few minutes ago, so pardon me if my hair ain't right. But we're going to do a March edition of the Walk and Rant. So sit back, we're going to cover a couple topics and whatever comes to mind. And it should be an enjoyable little walk and rant. I'm sure you guys will have plenty of ideas and plenty of statements you want to put in the comments section. All right, guys, so let's start it off, okay? All right, hold on a second. I have to adjust it a slight bit. There's quite a bit of traffic tonight, too, so that can affect the sound levels. My apologies. Okay, there we go. I just had to make a slight adjustment. All right, guys. So we're having a nice March 2025 walk and rant with your good pal, Wild Elf. And I'm sorry for the lighting. Even when things are semi-well lit, the filter on this phone invariably makes it look like it's a darkened cave or something. It's terrible. This is a rather well-lit street, actually. Big giant lights, and the lighting does extend to the sidewalk area, but from this video you cannot tell it. It barely even shows the sidewalk on the video, so I apologize for that. But the walk and rants are not about what you see on the video. It's about what is talked about on the video. Okay. Now, we were discussing a while back something along the lines of big flops from major video game companies and disappointing systems that they produced or disappointing add-ons that they produced. For example, the N64 had the HDD drive, and I think all of 12 games were made for it, only in the home country of Japan, and none of them stood out. There was no game from the list of 12 or so games. There's no game that people are touting that, oh, if you're a collector, you just got to have this game. Oh, it's one of the greatest N64 games you'll ever play. No. I haven't heard of any such HDD game that's a must-have or even a must-play, you know. And I'm sure with all these cyber substitutes for the systems on the computers and the Android and the iOS phones, I'm sure someone will come up with, they've already come up with the N64 apps that run the N64 games. It's only a matter of time if they haven't already come up with a HDD app. And yes, even though there's only 12 games for it, there will be somebody out there that will come up with an HDD program running tool or whatever. I can't even begin to think of how they would even extract a HDD game to put it in such a file to begin with. A very unusual technology. It's kind of like a UMD or some kind of prototype for the Sony UMDs almost. I'm guessing it's about that anyway. But here's what gets me. How much longer could the HDD had extended, how much longer could it have extended the lifespan of the N64? I mean, if they had fully supported it, and if they had a full agreement to also support it for U.S. release titles, I mean, depending on how much data could be stored on the HDD game devices, individually or separate, could we have gotten maybe Resident Evil remake, the first one, instead of a GameCube version? Could it have possibly been on the HDD, perhaps. I know they were working on Resident Evil 0, the game where you play primarily as Rebecca from the Bravo team, and you cover her plight of how she got where she got initially, and then eventually made her way to the mansion. And there were images that were leaked of the original product they were working on, which was basically, it was a reworking of Resident Evil 2, and they were making it Resident Evil 0. And then at some point, more of the GameCube, sorry about the noise, there's a genius going by. Yes, we're all very impressed at this very late hour of night. Okay. You know what the sad thing about that was? There's a hospital nearby. And they just decided to rev that crap up as loud as they can, even though there's a hospital right there. Late hours of night. Yeah, let's be really loud going by the hospital late at night. But anyway, yeah, I'm sorry. The thoughtlessness and the general uncaring of people toward other people is astoundingly blatant, evident, and abundant here in Central Florida, and possibly in certain parts of the country you're in, or maybe even in a separate country that one of you viewers may be in, and also kind of thinking about some example of somebody doing something careless or thoughtless like that. So what were we talking about? Oh yeah, the HDD. Had Nintendo completely supported the HDD drive that attaches underneath the N64, might we have had almost a GameCube experience before GameCube? How many possible GameCube titles might have been potentially debuted on the HDD drive? This is all a what-if scenario. But Nintendo went through all this process to develop the HDD, and then they just dropped it like a bad sandwich. I just dropped it right in a dumpster. And that's kind of bad too, because here they had their home audience, the actual Japanese gamers, and my understanding is they paid a decent amount for this machine when it came out. Only got 12 games, and then they just killed it. That was it. That reminds me of a particular machine that also an add-on for a separate game system entirely. Any of you Genesis and Sega Mega Drive owners know of the 32X. Well, over here in the Central Florida area, the 32X was really hyped. The advertisement on this side of the ocean was really hyped. It was supposed to be basically a Sega Saturn before you got a Sega Saturn, It was supposed to have upgraded cartridge games. It was supposed to have upgraded CD-ROM games when you had them plugged into the Sega CD, along with 32X plugged on top of the cartridge slot and all that. And the problem was they had all this bravado, all these claims, these bold claims, this machine's going to be excellent. You're going to get virtual racing. You're going to get virtual fighter like you never even thought possible. And so the games started to come in. They started to wash down. We were starting to see a few more 32X titles. And I myself, I'm so peeved off about this because I went and spent my good money on a Sega 32X. I mean, it was nice. I had the whole thing. It was all the booklets, everything that came with it. Just, I remember, there was so much packaging involved in this little box. It's about the size of a toaster, and it plugs into your existing Genesis, and you got to hook it up through I think it's about 3 life cables, and it had to have its own AC adapter. One of those big, chunky, heavy Genesis style AC adapters, the MK103 whatever adapter, and you could also power a Sega Game Gear with that adapter also. Same plug, same voltage. But I digress. So the big hook for the 32X, and prior to the 32X I had the Super NES. I was quite happy with my Super NES, but the 32X claims were that they would have a better version of Doom available on platforms, a better version, and this was a huge selling point at the time because the popularity was still quite immense for Mortal Kombat 2. Mortal Kombat 2, the fans were in a mad fever for it. I don't think they gave up the searching for a better Mortal Kombat 2 home version until the MK trilogy finally came out. And I know you're going to say, well, you know, yeah, didn't they release MK3 and MK Ultimate MK3 before trilogy? Yeah, but the fandom that's really after the Mortal Kombat home versions, they you know, they're not satisfied. To this day, they're not satisfied. They have the arcade one-ups now, which is probably the closest thing you're going to get to the arcade Mortal Kombat 2 in your house. Some of them are a bit pricey, some of them aren't. Some of the shark fin Mortal Kombat 2's arcade one-ups, you know, they're in the $200 to $280 dollar range used. But some of the later ones are going for higher dollars because the box shape to the cabinet's a little more midway styled, and instead of the shark fin shape. And they have an upgraded screen in them too. But I digress. So we're talking about the 32X, right? 32X version of Mortal Kombat 2. And I had trailed off from that. Sorry about that. And it's probably because of my complete anger. I have a seething, raging, almost an unnatural hatred for the 32X. I'd be less angry if someone took a hot steaming dump in my backpack and didn't tell me than the experience I got from the 32X. The 32X, it had all these claims that Mortal Kombat 2 would be the best home version ever at that point. And that Doom, 32X Doom, it was going to be better than any of the platform versions at that time. And that was a big claim, because I believe at that time the SNES version that I enjoyed thoroughly on my SNES, not to mention SNES Mortal Kombat 2, were excellent. They blew the original Genesis Mortal Kombat 2 out of the water, and I think at the time what was the Genesis had zero tolerance, you know, and it had a little tiny little window to navigate the 3D world on. Although the Brazil Genesis Mega Drive owners, they lucked out. That was the only country that got a release of Duke Nukem 3D on the Genesis Mega Drive. And for us Super NES owners here in America, you know, we didn't get to see Duke Nukem on a Super NES. So Doom was kind of the closest thing we would get to that. But so I spent this money on the 32X. This add-on that's supposed to boost, upgrade my Genesis and my Sega CD at that time. It's supposed to make it literally the Tower of Power, yeah, because it added a lot of height to the Genesis, and if it was already stacked on top of a Sega CD unit, it was pretty tall once you put a cartridge in the very top of it. And this was kind of lovingly mocked by Sega owners, and was not so lovingly mocked by people that were exclusive to Nintendo. But me, I wasn't exclusive. It's just I found that the Super Nintendo version of quite a few different games looked better. The music sounded better. It was just an overall better capable machine when it came to graphics and sound presentation. Now, gameplay factors in, and in a lot of cases where the Sega Genesis shines is not so much because of better graphics, but because of better gameplay, or more accurate to whatever the arcade game was in its gameplay feel. In the case of Mortal Kombat 1, the Genesis with a code offered the blood and gore of Mortal Kombat 1, whereas Nintendo had taken this absurd stance of no blood on Nintendo. And I guess they thought that this would have them winning over the hearts of parents so they'd feel safe to buy the games for their kids. But what this actually ended up doing was revealing who's buying the games, and usually who the games are actually being bought for, which, you know, surprise, and Nintendo has never really grown out of this too much, but their shareholders kind of twisted the arms of the Nintendo company, as it were. But they pretty much thought that all gamers were like 5 years old, 6 years old, you know. This is typically what Nintendo makes their games for, is like 6-year-olds. And that's how they treated the game market for the longest time. And granted, there are some games that are quite complex that have come out on Nintendo. I'm not discounting that at all. There's also some extremely overhyped games that have a ridiculous retro game value that they clearly do not deserve. And I know there's a bunch of people there that love some of these games, but I'll give you an example. And we're still talking about the 32X and why it was disappointing, but wait a minute. The example of overhyped, overvalued retro games, and I'm going to say it, I don't care how unpopular it is, Earthbound. Earthbound, grossly overpriced. And it's just not worth what they're asking. It was a forgettable title when it came out. A lot of the copies of Earthbound ended up going to the bargain bins at a lot of major retailers. And I just remember that came out and people were like, well, what the heck's that? And they saw some of the box art and it looked like really badly drawn little sprites. And it looked like it was mostly little kids stuff, and nobody had any interest in it. But as we continue with the original train of thought, which was the Sega 32X, I had purchased the Doom and I had purchased Mortal Kombat 2 for 32X. I also had Supreme Warrior for the Sega CD 32X version, and I also had Digital Pictures Corpse Killer for the Sega CD. And around the time I had bought the 32X. Well, let's say right off the bat, my copies of Supreme Warrior, the CD game for 32X CD, you would be playing the game probably 20 minutes in, I would say. And my discs were flawless. There were no problems. The data was fine. There were no gouges or scratches, none of that. But for whatever reason, you'd get 20 minutes into the game, Supreme Warrior, 32X CD. And it's got options where you can change. At the beginning of the game, you can decide what language the audio is going to be in. Well, one of those audio choices is Portuguese, I believe. And so I'm playing the game in English mode. And without fail, every time I ever try to play Supreme Warrior 32X CD, it would always flip around the 20-minute mark, and the whole game would just be in Portuguese for the remainder of the game, and there was nothing I could do about it. Now, some would say, oh, well, that's not a 32X flaw. That's probably the flaw of the company that made that game for it, because it wasn't a Sega first-party title. And I'd say, okay, that's one bad experience, but I'll chalk it up to it's that other company's fault, right? And so I put in the main game. The main game that I bought the 32X for, that I felt got the most hype. And granted, I did have Virtua Fighter, and I had, what was the other one? I had the Virtua Racing Deluxe. Now, Virtua Racing Deluxe looked very close to the arcade version. I'm not going to knock them on that. That and Virtua Fighter was remarkably similar to the arcade versions. There's some people that argue that the 32X version of Virtua Fighter 1 is better and has a better animation rate than the Sega Saturn version of Virtua Fighter 1. So I'll give it its accolades only on those two titles. First-party titles, too, by the way. And they definitely had plenty of time to fine-tune the home versions of those two titles. But we're getting to the ones that were braggings, were very hype builders. The id Software Doom and the Midway's Mortal Kombat 2 32X. So, remember, I've had Mortal Kombat 2 for the SNES prior to the 32X. Same goes for Doom. The red cartridge SNES Doom, which is probably one of the elite games of all time, in my opinion, for the SNES. It could have used a password save. That would have been nice. That's the only complaint I really have, is it doesn't have a password save for that game. So here, lo and behold, is the 32X version of Mortal Kombat 2. And I'm playing this game. First, I look at the fighter selection screen, and it does look better than the Genesis. It looks identical to the SNES's fighter select screen. The color choices, the way things are kind of motion blurred in the background of that, and some of the music in some areas sounds good, like the arcade a little bit, or slightly equal with Super NES, maybe a little clearer in some areas than the Super NES. But then there's areas that, for no reason, they have the Genesis. They have Genesis music from like the original Genesis Mortal Kombat 2 on the 32X Mortal Kombat 2, which, that was a mark against it. There's no reason for that. The quirky kind of brain damaged Genesis Mortal Kombat 2 music It was what you could get for the original Genesis Mortal Kombat 2. But for them to be using any of that in the 32X version was definitely a surprise, an unwelcome, unwanted surprise. And then, lo and behold, it does have the arcade beginning screens with telling the story of Shang Tsung, Goro, their defeat, how Shang Tsung got Shao Kahn to grant him another chance and youth again. And so you get those story screens, those images, and you get the versus fighter screen images extra big. They're a little larger than they look on the SNES. The SNES does not include the beginning story image screens on the SNES version. It does include the text, the words, the paragraphs, but not the big blazing arcade images. So right there, the 32X was good. They were getting good marks because they got that. That was impressive. But then the gameplay. Well, the gameplay, in my opinion, it played very much like the Genesis version of Mortal Kombat 2. 32X and Genesis version were almost equal as far as how they played. But some of the sound effects, some of the impact sound effects, some of the yells and hollers were a little too close to original Genesis Mortal Kombat 2. And not polished, not sounding as clear as they do on the SNES. And the other thing was, there were some braggings that the speed of Mortal Kombat 2 would somehow be better on the 32X Mortal Kombat 2. It was not. If you put SNES on normal difficulty, the 32X version is not any faster than the SNES normal difficulty mode. So that was a big fallacy they threw at us right there. And then, this is something that really disappointed me too, which was when you finally defeat the 32X Mortal Kombat 2 with whatever character you like, whoever you like. I'll just say it, if you defeat it with Sub-Zero or Kung Lao or something, you don't get the image that you would get on the arcade version. They're supposed to give you a couple images with paragraphs for the endings. Well, on the 32X version, what they give you is the versus screen image. The versus screen image, then paragraphs with it for the ending. That's what you get. And I was blown away because I was like, well, on the SNES version, even though the window is a little smaller, they don't give you the versus screen for the ending. They give you the actual arcade ending screens, the actual artwork. And the 32X version could not even deliver that. So it was not as fast or faster. It wasn't faster than the SNES. The normal version was definitely the same speed or faster on the SNES. So that was one falsehood they told us. Two, the music and some of the audio was not arcade or even SNES quality. There are areas where it's the same Genesis Mortal Kombat 2 music, which is great. That's great if you're nostalgic for the Genesis version of the Mortal Kombat 2 music, but the 32X version had promised better. They told us that this would be the best arcade version on a home platform, that has yet to be or yet to have been released. And when they say something like that, you kind of take them at their word, I mean, I know I did. Hook, line, and sinker. And what was worse was some of the games, besides that one, and we're just currently talking about the MK2 version. And what was disappointing about it that made me so angry and furious at the 32X add-on to begin with. So yeah, it didn't have the arcade endings. It showed the incorrect pictures at the ending screens. It showed you the versus picture. And the Super NES version shows you arcade ending screens. And during versus matches, they even show you the versus screens. So they had both of that. The only thing they were lacking were the arcade intro screens at the beginning of the game. But the ending screens, that's ultimately more important than the intro images, because the endings are showing you, giving you an idea what the fate of your fighter is after they defeat Shao Kahn. Sorry, folks, I get a little passionate about that. I'm a big fighting game fan. I'm a huge Mortal Kombat fan. I like my fighting games to look real. I still appreciate the anime cartoonish fighting games, but back in the day when Mortal Kombat first rolled into arcades, and the mad fever over its sequel when that finally came in too, there was like crickets chirping over by the Street Fighter machines and one of the Neo Geo machines, because people were lined up halfway around the block trying to get in to play Mortal Kombat when it was available. And the same thing repeated when MK2 came out in the arcades. A lot of the gamers of today, the word arcade is thrown around a lot. Arcade collection, arcade. They don't know the experience of actually going down to some of those places, which would be somewhere probably off the edge of a shopping mall, a true shopping mall. Another experience that's getting lost through the ages. But I think shopping malls may make a comeback. But that will be connected when our local economy over here on our side of the ocean. I'm speaking, of course, from Central Florida. But yeah, shopping malls can come back. People got convenient, crazed with being able to order stuff online, and it kind of drove a good chunk of shopping malls out of the mainstream. But I think now that people have come back after the close downs, the shutdowns related to the COVIDs, they have come back from that, and they want to do more social interactions, especially with shopping and other things. They're realizing now how much they had been shut away, how much powers that be were kind of keeping people like they're trying to make people into hermits. They're only interacting through electronic devices or something. And I promote same sofa gaming. You want to do multiplayer? Fine. Get yourself a system that has 4 multiplayer controllers, whether it be a wired retro system or something that does Bluetooth gamepads or something. Same sofa, same room. a big 60-inch or 85-inch TV screen or whatever. Enjoy it that way. If you thrash somebody in a Super Mario, Smash Brothers, or Mario Kart 8 or whatever, it's a lot better if they're on the same sofa with you. The trash talk's a lot better. Slapping them on the shoulder, hey, you did it, whatever, it's a lot better. It's more personable. Don't let your social skills atrophy. People think that they're socially interacting on the internet, and to a very kind of neutered point, we are, but it's not half of the experience or half of the actual real world interactions of true social interaction. And right now they've got like psychological studies on this stuff, and they're proving it more and more every day, and it's kind of astounding, really. But let's get back. So MK2 32X was a big flop, big disappointment to anybody that had been familiar with MK2 on the SNES. Some of the fanboy eras probably don't like that, and I don't really care because I'm speaking the truth. Not all versions of MK2 are awesome, and in the case of the 32X version, it was a big overhyped flop. The only thing worse than that was the 32X Doom. And I will tell you the good points of 32X Doom. 32X Doom employed a password save. It did have all the gore. There was no censoring of the gore. But the music, the music was ridiculously crummy. We had come off of SNES Doom. SNES Doom had impeccable music. It sounded like you had a rock band right there in the middle of the machine practically. It was very well done. In fact, the audio for it had actually been redone, and it was more awesome sounding than the PC version of Doom around the time of the SNES version's release. But the 32X version had like blips and beeps and in the music track, and it sounded terrible. The original the open source sample teaser, whatever you call that was available to so many computers for the first Doom back in '93, its music really was not much of nothing, and the SNES really improved upon it. But the 32X version was worse than the original PC version's music. And on top of this, people were bragging about 3D texturing on the floors and 3D texturing on the ceilings in 32X Doom. And it does have the impressive feat of the textures on the floors and on the ceiling, but the animation frames, the FPS frames per second got unusually choppy, unusually low at different moments that the machine should have easily been able to pitter that mapping image building, and it was just struggling, and it was horrible. It was very noticeable, very choppy. My own copy of Doom for the 32X, and this is what really bugs me, and it's what really got me raging against this thing, would at random moments when the action would get really intense with different clusters of enemies and whatnot, it would start to glitch. It would glitch bad. The choppy stuff the choppy animation frames would act like slow motion at some point. And here I am going through this game, and at a couple points they had like a massive amount of enemies on one level, and it would glitch and the game would reset. The entire freaking game would absolutely reset. That's right, it would go down. And the moment I realized what had just occurred, and the fact that this did this a few more times in a couple more play attempts, I was beside myself with just seething anger at this moment. You know, I'm like, you know what? This never occurred on my SNES Doom. The animation flow might not have been as speedy as the PC counterpart on the SNES version, but it didn't have this weird choppy mayhem that was going on with the 32X. And unlike the 32X version, my SNES version of Doom never glitched out on me. It didn't freeze and then just get stuck because a bunch of enemies were approaching from different angles or whatever. And I was mortified. I was sitting there, and this was like a couple days trying to go through this Doom thing. And like I said, to its credit, it did have a password. More importantly, it had cheat codes. The Doom 32X does have cheat codes where you can do infinite ammo and health and all that, you know, the God mode they call it. Yeah. And the SNES version does not have that. It doesn't have any kind of password save, and it doesn't have cheat codes that you can access. But, you know, bear that in mind with a grain of salt. It does sort of have cheat codes if you have a SNES Game Genie. You can go on Google and find the Game Genie codes for Doom, and there's a couple codes that act almost like infinite health and ammo. What it is it gives you a staggering amount of health and a staggering amount of ammo at the very beginning of the game. And as you're going through the game, the damage you take and the ammo you spend, at some point the numbers start going down to a lot smaller numbers, and then you got to play it normal from that point. And hope that the extra ammo and extra health you got was enough to get you far enough through the game to possibly, maybe, win it. So, yeah, the SNES Doom, better than SNES. The 32X Doom, better than SNES Doom. Well, seeing that it can't even play without glitching and without the animation getting super choppy in some sections, no. The 32X Mortal Kombat, better than the SNES Mortal Kombat? Mortal Kombat 2, that is? No, absolutely not better. There are spots where the graphics look a little clearer. There are spots where the music lines up a little closer to the arcade music, which is a moment that gets shattered when you suddenly hear normal Genesis Mortal Kombat 2 background music. And overall, it was a huge disappointment. And I found that my SNES version, even in normal difficulty, not only was it as fast as the 32X version, but in some cases, usually when you're fighting the female ninjas, the speed would actually bump up. It would be faster than the 32X version. And because I was so familiar with the other company's product on both titles, the other company being Nintendo's version for Super NES, I realized exactly how flawed the 32X version was. And since these two games were the pinnacle, the absolute reason I bought the 32X in the first place, I was livid with anger. Livid with anger. And there was a couple other games I had. I had T-Mech, and I think I had Metalhead too, I'm not sure. But I had T-Mech. What was the other game? Oh, there was a Hummingbird game called Colibri. And the first time I started messing with that, I thought, oh, well, you know, this is going to be, this will defeat Mario. This is a great game, you know. But it was a very hard game. It was kind of like, it reminds me of the game Rayman a lot in the way the levels were laid out. Very colorful, had some nice positive music. And as far as I know, the only version of Colibri that exists is on the 32X, which is a shame because over the years they should have ported it at least to the Game Boy Advance. It would have been able to handle that. Beautiful game. And for the 32X, I'll say that Colibri was definitely one of the games that if someone was slightly brain damaged and they just had to have every 32X game, then Colibri should probably be amongst their collection. And because I can't really say anything good about the 32X. There's no games that stand out that make the 32X shine beyond anything else at that time period. I mean, I'll think about it for a second. You know, is there anything on the 32X that's better looking than what you would find on the Atari Jaguar? And the answer is a huge no. There is no 32X game that really does anything better than the Jaguar. The only 32X games that really get anyone's attention are the first party titles. I think there's Knuckles Chaotix is a 32X game. What was the other ones? Oh yeah, of course, Virtua Fighter and the Virtua Racing. Yeah, those are mainstays. They should definitely be in a collection for anyone that would have the misfortune of collecting 32X games. But that being said, there was a home version of Star Wars Arcade for the 32X. And Star Wars Arcade was reasonably decent. And I'll say that it was reasonably decent 32X game. Although I used to have the first Rebel Assault for my regular Sega CD, And I gotta tell you, that 16-bit Sega CD Rebel Assault was way better, to me at least, than Star Wars Arcade. Alrighty. Well, this has been an interesting walk-in rant. And this is the March or early March edition of this walk-in rant with your good friend, your great YouTuber that's glad to be doing these for all my loyal viewers and my outstanding subscribers. But yeah, so I'm definitely not a fan of the 32X anymore after having owned one. And anytime in comments on any videos, when people start talking about, you know, even beginning to pretend of how great the 32X supposedly is, I will definitely comment on them. And I don't care what manner of insults they hurl at me. I'll tell them like it is. It was super overhyped. Even Sega stopped support on the 32X remarkably early. I swear that was a time period in Sega history when they just basically lost their mind. They were throwing money at everything. They were throwing money at the 32X. They were throwing money at the Sega Saturn development. They were throwing money at the Netlink. They were throwing money at the Sega Channel. Yeah, some of us gamers remember the Sega Channel. It was like a cable box for your Sega Genesis. And if you were signed up for the Sega Channel, you had access to playing games online, games that were already made for Genesis, and some that were exclusives that you would only get to play on the Sega Channel modem cable box. I believe one of them, toward the end of the Sega Channel's lifespan, was the third Golden Axe. They didn't do a physical copy release of the third Golden Axe, but on the Sega Channel you could play the third Golden Axe. Not that it was a super amazing title or nothing, but you know, that was a thing. That was kind of an exclusive, and you know, this many years later it's available on the At Games Genesis collection. So now people can own it. And I'm sure the ROM had gotten around on the internet too, but it was a special thing. It was a special thing because Sega thought they were going to make a ton of money with the Sega Channel, and they didn't. And there was all kinds of other costs and other permissions, and it was a giant headache, just like the headache they got later with the Nomad, and the headache they got with how abrupt they had to drop the 32X in favor of throwing all their money behind the Sega Saturn, another machine that they really did not look out for, at least not here in the U.S. It seemed to do pretty well for a while in Japan, but it flopped like a bad fish in America. Sony, when Sony got done picking the bones of the SNES, their PlayStation started picking the bones of that Sega Saturn. One of the titles that I feel, if they had ever released it on Saturn, maybe the Saturn might have had a chance, but they chose not to. If Capcom had released Resident Evil 2 as a Saturn release also, then the Saturn might have had a chance. Because that game got so much hype, and it got PlayStation so many accolades. Well, Here I go rambling on, but then again, it is a walk and rant. All right, guys, I try to keep these short. This one's a little longer than I intended it to be. You guys have a great one. Give your folks a hug. Your loved ones, your spouses, your nieces, nephews, kids, whatever. Your favorite pet. And times are kind of tough nowadays. The world's changing in a big way, very rapidly in front of us. And if you're doing a decent thing for yourself and you see some folks struggling, you know, hey, help them out if you can. Things are difficult, you know. Have a good one. Have a snack. And have some comments down below, please, and I'll try to reply to them as quick as I can. Bye-bye. Your good friend, Wild Elf 26.